So, as part of our risk management, how do we organize all our risks? Well, the first thing we do is we have to create the risk registry. And this is an organized list of all the risks we can think of. Again, these are the known risks, not the unknown risks. And to do that, we have to identify the risks, then classify the risks, and then plan for the risks. So the first step is identify the risks. Where do we get these risks? It's going to sound familiar. Have you ever done a past project that was similar, and what kind of risk showed up or what kind of problems showed up? And you got to talk to experts, and you have to talk to your team members because they've probably done this before and they may have expertise you don't know about. Some of the techniques you would use are brainstorming, and we all know brainstorming. Everybody thinks of things, and you don't say they're wrong, and you write them all down, and then later you go, "Oh, that's a stupid one," and throw it out. But you don't tell them that in person. A more focused way of doing that is the Delphi technique, where you ask questions and then you re-ask questions, and you focus on get down to the questions that are the most important. And this way, we're looking at risk. So you ask for the risk, then you focus on the big risk, and you focus on that down. Well, what is that risk exactly? When we were talking about the fish boning, when we're trying to find the root problem, that would be similar to when we were doing risks. And of course, then you want to interview the experts and interview your staff. So you have your interviewing techniques, asking your questions beforehand. The other place you can get risks is if you have done a SWOT analysis. The W and the T's, the weaknesses and threats, are risks for your project. And you should have done a SWOT analysis for your project earlier. Once you have your list of risks, you have to create the risk registry. Well, actually, you get your risk, then you figure out how you're going to mitigate or categorize and then mitigate your risk. Then you create the risk registry. It's just, you can use Excel, but just make a long list of all the risks. You give it an ID number, you give it a rank number of how important it is. Then you give it a name, some description, some category. You can make up your own categories: hardware, personnel, weather risk, environmental risk. So you come up with just categories of risk. Then you look for the root cause of the risk. Again, looking at the fishbone technique. The root cause is what is really what's causing this risk. Then you look at the triggers. Triggers is not the best word. Triggers makes you think of what causes the risk, but that's not what we're looking for when we talk about triggers. When we talk about triggers, we're looking for how would we know the risk has occurred. So it's really the metric we're going to use to measure it and what threshold we're going to find. Again, when we way back in the beginning when we were doing integration management, we were talking about setting up the metrics and the thresholds. We're going to do the same thing when we're doing that for the risk as well. So, at what point do we call out the snow trucks? When there's a threat of snow, when the weather forecast, storm warning, storm watch, when the snow is actually falling. So we have when this threat is triggered. Then we list our potential responses, and these are going to be our contingencies and maybe the fallback thrown in there. Then you assign a risk owner, and this is really important as a project manager. You have to assign a risk owner. And it doesn't mean this is the person responsible for solving the problem, but it's definitely the person responsible for monitoring the problem. They're usually the person involved in implementing the contingency plan, but not necessarily. So they need to have access to the measurement metrics to be able to see what's going on. Then you have to come up with a probability of it occurring. If you looked in an earlier video, you can see we have the risk matrix, and I used 1 to 3. 1 to 3 is common. You can do 1 to 5. You can do a percentage, how often you might think something might occur. And of course, the impact. Same thing, 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. How big is the risk? Of course, something that's highly probable that has a huge impact, if you look at when we did the rank number, would be much higher in your rank of risk than things that have a low risk and a low probability of occurring. And then, of course, the status. This is the last item on your risk registry. This says, has it been triggered? Are we still monitoring it? Is it not even near occurring? So as you're looking at the triggers, you see, are the triggers about to be implemented or not? The other thing is you have a risk report. And basically the risk report is the status of maybe the top 10 risks and also the status of the risks that have been triggered or may be about to be triggered. And so you need to do some risk tracking. You don't just make this report, stick it in a drawer, and then never look at it again until the snow falls. You need somebody to keep track of it. And I have lectured on the uh, waste of time of having reports and reports and reports, but risk management is something you need to make sure that the risk owners know is important. They need to be looking at the data and looking at the metrics to make sure that these risks haven't been triggered. Someone needs to go in the basement to see if there's water puddling down there. You can't just say, "Oh, wow, I didn't know the risk management was important." But having weekly meetings about, we going over every risk item. Have you done this? Have you checked this? Have you checked this? It's probably a waste of time. But keeping an eye on the top 10. Um, and you think about the top 10, again, that would be the top 10 of the most likely and the biggest ones. And you say, have you checked these? And if the metrics are getting close to being triggered, can we figure out why that's happening, and maybe we can deal with that. And that's basically how you manage your risks.